Got it. Welcome to Design at Large, the Design Lab's weekly lecture series. And this quarter, this is our first lecture of the winter 2022 quarter. And we're focusing on the theme of from the stars to the bottom of the ocean, trying to look down, look at the earth, and consider some ways in which conservation is being done with technology and with imaging. We have 4 speakers. One of our ways of focusing on the theme this quarter is around the idea of collaborations. And we're bringing to the idea of collaboration, both the idea of people working together in teams, but also we're bringing together teams that haven't been in communication in some of our meetings and are meeting sometimes for the first time to talk about the ways that their work might intersect in the future. So we're doing some kind of team matching in our program this quarter. Welcome also to all of the students in the 3 courses who are enrolled in the class, graduate students and undergraduates in design. I think that you'll get a lot out of the focus on design in oceanography, design in environmental conservation practices, and imaging technologies around this quarter. Welcome to visitors from within UCSD, from the outside, and from the community. Our program today is going to be flipped from the way that it's listed in the on the website. We are first going to be hearing from Dominique, Rissolo, and Falko Kuester. Dominique is an archaeologist and associate research scientist with the Qualcomm Institute, where he leads the Cultural Heritage Engineering Initiative. Dominique, is it pronounced Che? It's C-H-E.
Chai.
Chai, okay, Chai. He has worked closely with UC San Diego students in the lab and in the field. He also directs the WAVE lab. And he is actively involved in the development of digital workflows for analysis and visualization of multimodal data from cultural heritage sites, especially focusing on shore and underwater technologies. He's enabled collaborating researchers to expand their technical capabilities. He's co-director of the Hoyo Negro and Costa Escondida projects and is involved in a number of digital heritage efforts in the US, Latin America, and Europe, particularly around Mayan archaeology. Falko Kuester holds appointments as professor in the Department of Structural Engineering and Computer Science and Engineering at the Jacobs School of Engineering at UCSD, and he is the director of the Cultural Heritage Engineering Initiative, CHI, the Center of Interdisciplinary Science for Art, Archaeology, and Architecture, CISA3, the Cal-IT Center of Graphics, Visualization, and VR, or Gravity, and the Drone Lab at UCSD. Professor Kuester focuses on methodologies and techniques for cultural heritage diagnostics, preservation, and analytic imaging, as well as visual and cultural techniques that provide engineers, scientists, art historians, and restorers with the means to explore historic artifacts. And so they're going to be focusing on the concept of digital twins in world cultural heritage sites and artifacts. I will turn it over to Dominique and Falko.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Falko. Should I go ahead and proceed? I'll do that. Okay. Well, I'll share screen. Of course, please let me know if this comes up successfully. It should say the future of digital twins in archaeology, challenges and opportunities. Can you see that okay, Lisa?
We can, it's perfect.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, Lisa. And also I really enjoyed my time yesterday with Catherine and Kilma. I'm getting to know each other a bit more. And I think what you had envisioned, Lisa, in terms of a potential collaboration is sort of taking root, and I'm really excited to be here with Falko and with Catherine and with Kilma today. So I'm going to read from my notes. Otherwise, it's difficult for me to stay within our 15-minute slot, so I thought that might be best. And my approach to today's conversation might be a bit more philosophical in nature, and hopefully looking forward to a conversation with all of you after our presentation. So emerging and expanding workflows in digital archaeology, from data capture to visualization, have proven transformative. Indeed, technologies that enable archaeologists to digitally document both landscapes and artifacts at high resolution and with remarkable color fidelity have effectively changed the game. However, when such approaches are uncritically adopted, they can actually distance us from a more meaningful understanding of the past and present. In our pursuit of accurate geometry, we often unintentionally privilege the surface attributes of heritage objects and essentially ignore the intangible and non-visual phenomena with which cultural materials are imbued. For example, the low barrier to entry that structure for motion photogrammetry affords has been something of a Pandora's box, resulting in the proliferation of textured meshes that are represented, or I should say presented, as reliable representations of objects and are often difficult to critique. A more measured path forward, based on an appreciation of the opportunities and limitations that technology presents, can involve the embracing of new tools without the abandonment of what is tried and true. The strengths are indeed obvious and extend beyond our increased ability to document archaeological sites, features, and objects, and represent them as 3D surface models. But we first must move beyond the model. To quote Geert Verhoeven, too often this 3D datification wave has fed the belief that the mere creation of digital surface models will allow scholars all over the world to study heritage in ways previously unheard of. Although partly correct, statements like these distract from the fact that these digital 3D data only represent one of the many essential characteristics of a heritage asset, end quote. So, what does this datification enable us to do? Well, as Falko likes to say, making the invisible visible. Okay. So the rapid, let's see if I can get this to play. There we go. Oh, my apologies. The rapid development and quantitative methods and digital workflows for cultural heritage has been nothing short of transformative in this regard. Historical building information modeling, for example, offers a powerful, integrated, multimodal approach to architectural data management and monitoring. And there is no contesting the value of advanced, non-destructive diagnostic imaging techniques for the analysis of heritage structures and objects. Data-driven, evidence-based decision-making has certainly empowered conservation and preservation specialists and improved intervention outcomes. Falko will talk a bit more about this in his conversation, some of the very practical ways in which we use these data and how they really enable us to make the kinds of decisions that otherwise might lead us down a less than optimal path in terms of how we interact with heritage objects and structures. So the confluence and systematic integration of data from different complementary imaging modalities enables us to detect, assess, and quantify and diagnose, in addition to simulate and to classify. So related to this is the use of models as digital twins to spur analytical reasoning by means of interactive visualization, as Falko likes to say. AR, VR, and MR can be far more than edutainment and can can be used to reveal elusive spatial and temporal contextual relationships, leading to new insights into past human lifeways or events, and can transport aspects of ourselves to aspects of places we may never go in a physical sense. To take it a step further, collaborative, immersive environments, enabling colleagues and stakeholders to interact with digital twins at full scale and in stereo can be powerful analytical and interpretive and even deliberative tools. Perhaps not as obvious is the use of models to facilitate archaeological fieldwork. Here, with our colleagues' prototyping lab at Qualcomm Institute, we use a 3D surface model as the basis for the design and fabrication of a custom cradle used in the recovery of a massive pelvis of a new species of giant ground sloth from a submerged cave in Mexico. And perhaps most obvious to us is the power to connect and engage. A compelling case can be made for the move toward virtual reconstruction of certain heritage places, which enables visitors via augmented reality to experience what sites may have looked like at selected periods in the past. The advantages over traditional architectural reconstruction are obvious. Digital approaches are often more open, iterative, diachronic, dynamic, didactic, and ultimately less costly than traditional brick and mortar reconstruction. and can be designed so as to enable broader public participation. So within a generation, we have witnessed a fundamental shift in the ways in which we interact with archaeological sites. Much of this is driven by the rapid democratization and widespread adoption of enabling technologies. But interestingly, as we embrace expedience in the collection and analysis of data, we may very well be losing a certain intimacy with both the tangible and intangible aspects of our past. And it's in these intimate relationships with heritage places that lie well-worn paths to understanding. So I recall recently conducting a rapid scan of a Maya pyramidal structure with a student. He remarked on the fact that we had collected more points in 1 hour with a terrestrial laser scanner than I could have collected with a total station over the course of an entire field season. Indeed, I could not disagree. And no doubt the increased density of data would result in a more comprehensive and accurate reflection of geometric reality. But then it occurred to me that over those field seasons of years past, I had developed meaningful relationships with those structures and buildings. In the protracted process of traditional documentation, those buildings filled my nostrils and got under my fingernails. I tripped and stumbled on them. I got cut and scraped by them. These connections, cultivated over time, are visceral phenomena that open our senses and activate our innately human powers of perception. More importantly, it is in the time invested in the studying of a building or a monument or a sculpture that we increase our ability to better understand its sociocultural or religious function and meaning in ways that are not possible through viewing a quickly rendered point cloud. Clearly, there is something missing, or at least something that's drifting to the margins in the world of archaeological analysis, conservation, and restoration. It is the holistic, nuanced, richer, and I would argue both tangible and intangible connection to the places and objects we study. When we reflect on Verhoeven's statement, at least two rather significant shortcomings of 3D models begin to emerge. One involves the treachery of images. Magritte was correct. This is not a pipe. In the same way that a 3D surface model does not possess the myriad surface or the myriad physical attributes, pace, temper, texture of a ceramic vessel. These attributes are meaningful, as are the intangible qualities, the agency of the person who crafted the vessel, the object's subsequent life history, a life history perhaps filled with song or prayer. Of course, most archaeologists should know this already. However, our growing collective fascination with 3D models has, in a way, given these surrogates or twins, these point clouds or textured meshes, greater authority, perhaps a kind of authority we never granted to photographs and drawings. When we valorize models, we often unwittingly reduce the objects they represent to geometry and RGB data. A second shortcoming involves an odd twist on the digital divide. The act of working with physical materials can offer us, as cultural heritage practitioners, a unique experiential perspective. As we replicate or recreate heritage objects or architectural elements, we experience how marble yields to the sculptor's chisel, or how different types of wood respond to the carpenter's plane, or how a blade detaches from a core, or when cut tule reed are dry and ready to be crafted into a canoe. We understand how things fit together, and we understand better how they come apart. We become to view structures and features and objects as more than the sum of their parts, but rather the culmination of processes and practices imbued with human values and ideas. It is this connection between object and object representation, for example, that becomes so vital to the interpretive process. So it is incumbent upon us to ensure that future generations of archaeologists and cultural heritage practitioners do not uncritically embrace emerging technologies. More traditional ways of doing things, sketching, drawing, handcrafting replicas, still have their place in the larger workspace, and all technologies, no matter how advanced, have their limitations. We must find a way to afford each other the opportunity and time to cultivate such relationships with heritage places and with knowledge bearers, as we simultaneously master the new and essential digital tools of our trade. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dominique. Falko, do you want to jump in here? That was wonderful, Dominique.
Let me connect right to that as well, and sort of connect some of sort of our motivating triggers to get into this field of digital twins, and augment it with some of the technology that's really driving it forward. And as part of it, since we all have turned into scientifically anchored storytellers, I'll give you a quick 4-minute summary of where we are coming from. This view and with our mission and vision of really engineering a future for the past. And the past might be thousands of years old for engineered artifacts, but it also might just be seconds old, because there's always something to be learned, and we need to be able to take that information right into the future with us to make the right decisions going forward. So let me get started. Okay, so UNESCO defines world cultural heritage as our legacy from the past, what we live with today and what we pass on to future generations, a legacy that really embodies human imagination, ingenuity and innovation overall, yet a legacy that's under constant threat by human-made and natural disasters, extreme events that literally within the blink of an eye can and will change what we get to pass on to future generations. And as engineers and scientists, we say this is absolutely unacceptable. We need to come up with an integrative, data-driven approach, a digital twins-based approach to acquire, to curate, to analyze, and to disseminate information, and to learn throughout that forced feedback loop on how we represent the state of health and care of artifacts and carry them forward. So now with today's design technologies, our students can literally sit down tonight, right? Imagineer, design, model, simulate a next generation robotic platforms that allows us to carry sensors to where they need to be to capture actionable data. We can then fabricate that digital artifact, right? Turn it into a physical counterpart literally overnight, right? Casting an idea into its physical equivalent, instrument this platform and take to the skies on a very mission-specific format. It's not the one-size-fits-all anymore, right? We really can design, we can engineer systems that satisfy a particular mission objective, from fixed wing to multi-rotor, to lighter than air, to collapsible wing aircraft that fly, that drive, even platforms that dive, right? Allowing us to get the right sensor to the right location at the right time, to collect perishable data that ultimately has to be turned into actionable data that allows anyone, anywhere, right, to make the right decisions. And that's a rather daunting challenge at hand, but our students are really up to that. So imagine, right, you could take these systems, robotics platforms, to capture images, videos, and ultimately models that allow all of us to really experience the excitement, the beauty of the environment, the artifacts that surround us, but mitigate and really makes that possible through the construction of digital twins that capture geometry, that capture material, that capture the state of health of an artifact and allow us to explore it. But imagine we could do this at a multi-scale approach, from the macro scale to the micro scale, really gets a bird's eye view, but then dive down to the finest detail, but enables us through cooperating robotic systems that literally as a swarm from the sky, from the ground, handheld or even underwater, capture that information to allow us to synthesize models and reinvestigate them, but at the level of precision where engineering decision-making is suddenly possible. We can really assess the state of health and create a path forward to a structure, to an artifact. But now imagine we could do this at a level of resolution that becomes exciting to all of us, right, to experience these environments. And now through the virtual reality systems, the holodecks that we have, allow all of us to step into that arena of scientific discovery, to experience it at scale, above scale, below scale, but also experience these artifacts that are surrounding us in situ, to literally get in touch with the environment that surrounds us, to look below the surface, to make the invisible visible, literally, by making the impossible possible, to rub shoulders with the grand masters, right? To see the genesis of a piece of art, to really feel the story that it has to tell. But to do this in a crowdsourced citizen science context where all of us contribute towards the discovery process, but ultimately takes that cyber environment and cast it back into its physical counterpart, where we build these cyber physical systems anchored in the digital twins that are out there. And that's really one of the core drivers that we have, that our students have for the mission at hand. So what we said, right, we're really interested in how do we acquire information about the environment that surrounds us at any scale, and enabling that through really next generation robotics platforms and sensor platforms that are co-located, right? There's always a reason, right, towards why we're doing robotics. We want to solve a real world problem. These robotic systems capture information at any scale that we care about, literally proliferating the access to data, but also democratizing, right, how we get to tell a story. Suddenly we don't have to be a multi-billion company to launch $1 billion satellite. A drone might do the same trick at much higher resolution, much higher accuracy and temporal scales. So it's a complete game changer. Ultimately, right, we're looking at how do we curate all of that data to have a comprehensive data-backed digital twin that then can be shared with communities, modeled, revised, and grown. So it doesn't turn into that white elephant or that stale model, but it really takes on a life on its own. And a big part of this is really to look at how do we visually, right, create engaging experiences around those data assets. And we'll look at some of the examples in a moment here. But ultimately, we believe acquisition, curation, analysis, and dissemination has to be always going hand in hand. And each step helps inform and guide the others as we're taking them into the future. I just want to very quickly, since this is a design-themed topic as well, some of the platforms that our students have been designing for mission-critical environments. Right, so you see shape-shifting robotic vehicles that are deployable in forests, which you literally can shoot through a canopy cover, or airdrop into a target environment which unfold at a particular target altitude, can fly their objective mission, capture data, and then return securely. Systems that are designed to fly inside caves or inside tight structures where a motor-rotor drone suddenly doesn't have to pitch or roll anymore to fly forward or sideways, but where simply by controlling the thrust vectors of these propellers, we can slide in plane in very tight spaces, acquiring data that's required. Systems that have extreme long endurance and structural stability, flying in hostile environments, right, that are being designed by the students to ultimately, right, always be 3D printed, physically tested, and re-engineered. And there's rarely ever any system that hasn't gone through dozens, if not hundreds or millions of design cycles to make that happen. Millions on the simulation side, maybe dozens on the physical experimentation, but it's suddenly possible in these completely new configured design cycles that are informed by rapid prototyping. We're lucky, right, to have very talented students on our team here that are actually looking at the sensor systems that we get to deploy that go up to billion pixel type resolution images, right, for just vision-based systems, and then way beyond for other sensor platforms that allow us to acquire the environment at unprecedented detail and ultimately synthesize these higher dimensional digital twins out of this, where we have geometry at the surface and subsurface volumetric level, but where that also can look at characterizing materials and other attributes that have to go into the digital twin. And ultimately, right, all of this is controllable through platforms that our robotics engineering oriented students have been putting together. And I think that's where it becomes together very interesting, that this interplay of different skills from different domains really kind of goes hand in hand. Ultimately, all of that data is only as good as the insights that we derive from this, right? Can we turn this into actionable data, ultimately to guide, inform decision-making, but also help with the planning of future missions. And those are the large-scale walk-in virtual environments that you've seen images of that we've built in the Qualcomm Institute. And our team is really driving, right, to a point where we can teleport, where we can time travel to those target environments to experience them at resolutions previously not possible, right? Cheating, well, time, cheating, some challenges that would exist in real life that would be really hostile. I want to show a couple of other examples where digital twins really come in. The 2014 Napa Valley earthquake was a 6.0 moment magnitude event that generated $1 billion in damage in 20 seconds, right? Our students essentially deployed the day after with a set of different robotics technology, imaged that site, created a digital twin of the Trehessen family vineyard, one of the very few structures that are really one of the historic landmarks, over 100 years old in the US. And while they were on site, they already had a baseline model in play to help the engineers, decision makers, right, help inform how to rehabilitate or at least secure that structure, which was constantly shifting, nearing collapse, while team members in the lab back home were able to step into our VR environments to experience this, right, firsthand, to explore at scale. And that interplay of rapid response and analysis and decision-making really is a game changer. And again, these persistent digital twins now give us a baseline moving forward into the future. This, of course, extends to a broad range of environments. Here's something that might look like a coral reef, and it is indeed, but it's also part of a shipwreck, the Montana in Bermuda, which was severely, well, since it is a wreck, it went through disaster already or misfortune, but it's, of course, exposed to rather challenging environments at times. And over the last years, a couple of hurricanes hit Bermuda. And those historic sites, right, are always at risk. So this digital twin gives us a baseline of what that shipwreck or the remains thereof looked like, becoming a permanent archive and record into that part of Bermuda's history, while allowing us to cross-reference how environmental conditions, extreme events reshape it. So you can tell the story of what was, what is, and hopefully what will be, and how to help inform that going forward. But being able to do this really at island scale, where we can put information, in this case, these heritage sites, historic landmarks, into context, but combine it with content. I can really say, here are these artifacts, that's where they're located, this is what they look like at any particular point in time. But let's really drill down, right, to the fine detail. You saw the coral reef element momentarily, but these digital twins, right, imagine them as artifacts at scale, right? So it's not just a map, a 3D map, but it's really a reference scaffold for starters that is used to ingest geometry, again, surface, subsurface, volumetric information, but then material information, derivative data informing the state of health and change in that particular target environment. Now, we could also look at it from a different perspective, rather than archaeology, where you remove information to reveal historic artifacts. Part of it is happening here as part of a construction process, right? The site is being reshaped, but also artifacts being built that then, of course, start living into the future, for which we'd like to detect change and capture the evolution throughout its life cycle. Now through imaging techniques and again, synthesis of these spatial temporal digital twins, we can create these records, right? Rather than looking at a time-lapse image. Now we have a multidimensional model here that combines space with time, but there's also form and function and revealing different processes really unfolding. So this becomes a deep time archive, real-time deep time assets, right? Something that we can work with to assess, analyze a particular artifact, and subsequently study it, reveal information in a way it has never been able to be done before, right? And do this interactively, do this intuitively to understand a site, understand an artifact, understand its state of health, and ultimately guide how to best steward it into the future. And that through synthesizing these digital twins, now we can actually make the invisible indeed visible, right? By combining a broad range of imaging techniques that we've previously applied, and now visual analytics technique to put that lens into that environment. And I said ultimately this scales, right? So if we take these sensor packages, apply them into the live environment, which might be threatened in this case by bark beetle infection, wildfire, landslides, flooding related events through runoff, human or unintended consequences of well-intended actions, we can actually synthesize these twins at unprecedented resolution. It's actually 2.5 billion point model of Yosemite Valley, which tells us what the state of health of that environment was a couple of years ago, right? Environments that we now can explore through space and time, right? And that we can assess under a broad range of different conditions, which might be, well, California, earthquakes we had already heard, and wild fires. And I'll wrap it up with that. So our team is actually looking at deep time analysis across California. We have a massive sensor network deployed with over 1,000 sensor platforms in the state that are generating 2 billion samples per second, 24/7, 365 days out of the year. So generating a baseline for a digital twin of California, its environment, its state of hydration, its risk to wildfires, overall evolutions in the landscape. And we now have already 40 quadrillion data points in our deep time archive, which as of today is 30 petabytes of deployed storage for a research group, right, which we're going to fill by year's end. But data assets that really allow us to completely change how we ask questions about the environment that we live in. So with that said, I'm going to stop here. So what we're really after is, right, to create towards creating a comprehensive common operating picture of the environments, of the artifacts that we work with in that ever-evolving world, right, with a broad range of challenges that we are faced with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Falko. So just to flag a few things, especially for the students who are attending. So the idea of the digital twin that can tell the story in this incredibly data-rich set of dimensions of what was, what is, and predictively what will be. There's the question, who will tell the story of what will be? And I think most compelling of what Falko showed around what will be is the sensor platforms that are allowed to that allow us to see the unfolding of things like fire in terms of the importance of the predictive, but also the kind of concern that Falko expressed. All of the data is only as good as the insights, and who provides those insights, how we gain those insights, how they're shared. And going back to Dominique's incredibly important point, do not over-rely on the data uncritically, and keep in mind the embodied experience of touching and sensing. Just think about the people who are in those areas where we saw those fires unfolding and the value of the predictive. So maybe we can return to some of those questions, and especially focusing on the matter of who gets to decide on how we use insights, what the insights are about what will be. We turn to the company OurWorlds, led by Kilma Lattin, a Native American futurist who is helping to build the future of civilization around indigenous cultures, Native cultures. Since 2006, Kilma's work has helped preserve and transform Native American culture. In the 21st century through new technologies, he digitally preserved tribal archives and established DNA testing procedures to safeguard tribal enrollment practices. And in 2013, his TV project documenting Native Americans in the military was awarded with an Emmy. In 2015, his digital project, Our Games, transformed the ancient game of peon. Peon is a Native American game that he may talk about, played for thousands of years in person, transferred it to handheld mobile device. And in 2022, the current project, OurWorlds Incorporated, is a digitally mounted platform storytelling and culture that's designed for use on your cell phones. Some of you have already downloaded the software, for the test pilot, the app, and we'll be doing some work with that after the lectures. Catherine Eng is working with Kilma Lattin. She's the other half of OurWorlds. She is an award-winning designer, flagged as one of the most important designers to follow in the decade, and she's a developer of technology and filmmaker as well, with projects spanning mobile platforms, extended reality, film, scientific applications, and data visualization. Her apps have been featured in Apple's top 10 with over, how many downloads at this point?
3 million cumulatively.
Okay, I just wanted to see, was that accurate? Amazing. She is CTO and co-founder of OurWorlds with Kilma Lattin, and she holds a degree from the Cooper Union School of Art. So welcome to Kilma and Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you. We hope to do, and what we hope to accomplish, is to tell Native American stories in the most transformative and immersive ways possible using emerging technologies. We don't just live in history books. We are here and now and contributing into society. What we're trying to do is give people a great snapshot of what's happening now in the year 2021. Digital portals or wormholes to bridge the time-space continuum, because all around you throughout the United States and the world, there are indigenous stories to that land, that place. We are a finite resource. What we hope to do is make this a significant historical and cultural contribution for the future, and really try to future-proof our culture and our civilization. I'm Kilma Lattin, and this is OurWorlds. Did everybody get that? Did it work?
Good.
All right. Just a couple of things. I'm honored to be on this panel with these futurists and professors and doctors and really building the future. Lisa, thank you so much, and to the design laboratory and all the work that everybody's doing. When I was preparing today's lecture, Catherine and I were talking, and I'm going to talk about things from maybe a 30,000-foot view, and Catherine is going to dive down more into the visuals with her background in design. She has a particular genius, so I'm excited to hear what she has to say about things. Falko, I absolutely know what you're talking about when you talk about time travel. What we're doing is building digital replications of worlds that have been, are, or will be. This is something, you know, if you combine Minkowski and Einstein, these are things that they talked about. And the beauty of it is that, you know, we are now becoming enabled with the technology that we need to do that. And perhaps it's the closest thing to time travel we have. And it's nice to see that we're all arriving kind of at the same place at about the same time. So that being said, I want to talk about a couple of things that are important to me about this. And it addresses this concept of socially responsible and culturally visible. I understand the class is called Design at Large, and what we wanted to talk about was cultural design or designing culture. But there's a couple of things that you have to really be aware of when you're doing the sort of work that we're doing. In a twisted way, you might say that we're somehow playing God in the sense of who's telling the story of what happened in the past. So you got to be really careful here, because you have to be careful about accuracy. You do not want to change the space-time continuum with bad or inaccurate information, because then you twist and pervert the culture that was with inaccurate information. So you have to be careful about that. And the second thing that I want to talk about is the inherent clash between technology and culture. We're using technology not only to preserve and advance cultures, but also to build bridges between the cultures. And in the past, people have had some problems using technology to preserve and advance culture in new ways because they've gone about it in the wrong way. You think about, if you think about a knife as a technology or a sword or a gun, or you think about the evolutions of technology, not in the electrical sense, but even in the sense of tools that we craft and things that we use to make our lives easier and more efficient, some of those things have been used irresponsibly. And we don't want to do that with these digital forms of technology when we're building these time-space continuum portals to these worlds that we're superimposing on the existing world. And there's always going to be this clash between new technology and civilizations and cultures. And this has always been the case. But I would argue, and I would say that it's not that you're applying new technology to a civilization or a culture, but it's how you're applying that new technology to a civilization or a culture. So we on this panel, and I don't know if I speak for everybody, but for myself, and I see us all as experts, pioneering the application of emerging technologies to the oldest cultures and civilizations, landscapes, and the world. We're applying new technology to the world, and in the world, there are people and there are things. And there will always be, and just a side note, what we're doing is, in my experience, again, I don't want to speak for everybody, it's a bit controversial. There are culture warriors from my own civilization, my own culture, who are stuck. And I use that word deliberately, in the sense that we hear about the negative side of budging or moving culture. But in my opinion, you have to drive on. Culture has to change, has to adapt for survival. So myself and others who I've talked to find it to be our torch that we have to carry to advance our own technology and our own civilization. And I've spoken with tribal elders, not just in our region, but around the world, literally, because there are elements of tribalism that are universal. South America, Asia, North America, Canada, Australia with the Abos. There are elements of tribalism that are universal to this planet. So I have purposely sought out tribal civilizations as I've traveled around the world. And I've spoken with elders, and there is a consensus among who I believe to be the wise and the forward-looking, and that is that culture can change. Culture can adapt, and in a way it has to for survival. And I believe that technology is a wonderful way to do that. Just to keep in mind, though, that there are elements of history and tradition and culture that will always stay the same. That's the foundation of a civilization and a culture, is knowing where you came from, but not being defined by it. You don't have to stay stuck in the past. And Native Americans, some, are too often defined as a culture, they're too often defined by beads, turquoise, drums, feathers, stuff from our past. That's our history, that's where we've been, but where are we going? We must move forward and adapt into the 21st century, and that's what we're doing in OurWorlds, is that we're building that, and we're being very careful about how we do it. Because I believe it's important, but a little foolish to remain stuck in the past. So we have to have new cultural practices, which is why I digitized Payon 6 years ago. You can take where you've been, but you're free to move into new areas. And this is part of the human experience, imagining, designing, and creating new realities using methods and new technology. Using new methods and new technologies. And I believe that's what we're doing here on this panel. So we need to take control of the future. It's up to us to build it. We should not sit back and allow others to do it for us. We've been in that position before. I'm speaking about Native Americans at this point. For example, and what I mean by that in terms of how we're using emerging technologies and how we're doing things at OurWorlds, we believe in the future of virtual reality, but we think that it has limited application. We think that the best use for these emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, extended reality, point cloud, all of these things, is to build and geolocate new experiences on the beautiful world that we have today, so that you go about your day and you interact with places in new ways to find who was there before, what's the story of the land, because we believe every square mile has a story, and we want to uncover and tell those stories. So when we talk about where others may be going, is my time up? My time is almost up. All right.
Kilma, you're okay. I wanted to just jump in with a question from the audience, and also to say thank you for your backdrop, because I'm reminded that I forgot to do the land acknowledgement, which is that UCSD sits on Kumeyaay land. And the question for you is from Nicole Trapp in the audience, who asks, how do you define, or how do we define tribal?
You know, I believe that you can have a tribal situation in an office building. I mean, I think it's like this concept where you have people who congregate together and come up with their own practices. Again, I don't know if that's written anywhere, but I've seen elements of tribalism everywhere, including the office place, corporate America, my Indian tribe. So tribal, I believe, is something that you get when you have groups of people who are together.
And in terms of your talk, Kilma, I think the question came up at a moment when you were talking about how you're doing both tribal specific but intertribal projects within OurWorlds. And if you could just say a little bit about being from the Pala tribe, but doing work with a whole variety of tribes nationally, and how it's trans-indigenous in the sense of US specific, but trans-tribal within the OurWorlds project.
Okay, yeah, so there's over 565 distinct tribal entities in the United States, all sovereign entities. So for me to pretend to speak for all of them, I do not. I speak for myself from my tribe, the Pala tribe. But what we are doing is supporting other tribes. And that's what I think it's important to come at things from a position of working to support others, working to support other tribes. So when you build intertribal coalitions, you're not doing a top-down thing where you're saying, you know what's best, and you're going to come in and you're going to tell them how to do it and what you want, and line up all those people, and this is what we're going to do. And we drag in our cameras and we drag in our narrative and we say, okay, and then we go in and we just do the work. That's not, it comes from the complete opposite. It's the inverse of that, where, you know, you're there to support with your technology and your expertise to help build from the ground up. So when you build intertribal coalitions, it's really about coming from a position of helping and supporting.
Thanks, Kilma, for clarifying. Shall we move on to Catherine, or do you want to have a minute to wrap up here?
You know, I'll take my minute at the end. We'll kick it over to Catherine, and then I'm sure there's going to be some great questions from the audience that'll allow me to segue into how I was going to conclude anyways. So let's just keep moving forward.
Fabulous, thank you. We have a big chunk of time at the end for the workshop and further discussion, so.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that was awesome, Kilma. Yes, and it's great to have the overview of basically what, really tribal, the state of tribal culture, the state of, tribal technology, and I feel really privileged to be able to work on this project. And I've certainly learned a lot since we've been working together. And so, a lot of what I'm going to share with you now, this is technology we've developed together. These are insights that we've, really come across, as we've been developing the technology. So certainly, let me just go ahead and share my screen. Just gonna go like this. Present. Okay. So let me just back up a little bit here. Okay, so yeah, welcome. The title of our talk is Cultural Design, a 21st Century Model. It's a sort of overview of how we're thinking about the technology and its interface with indigenous cultures. Just to start off with, I love telling this story. The way I got involved with the project is, I'm a designer developer, and a couple of years ago, I actually forgot to sign my own kids up for STEM camp, so I decided to run my own, and it ended up being very successful. And we did a Kickstarter, and we actually hosted it at the Student Services Building, the old one near Mandeville Auditorium on campus, and Kilma and his son were one of the families who joined that summer. And I met him and I found out about the Payon app, which I thought was super cool. I was very curious about the actual game. So he said, well, why don't you and your son come out and check out the Payon game? It's happening tonight at Santa Isabel Reservation. And so we drove out there, and it was like an hour in the dark. He says something funny. It's like, anywhere you want to go in Indian country, it's about an hour from San Diego proper. And, once we got out of the car, there's like this smell of smoke. There's little dots of fire on the horizon, and we begin to hear chanting and laughing. And it was just this magical place, where there were all of these games happening, in front of fires. I mean, you can look up what the actual game is, but there are two competing teams. They sort of psych each other out, and there's a game of dexterity basically involved. But yeah, long story short, it's like, what do you think? I mean, as far as Payon, you're an app developer. I mean, how do we sort of do Payon 2.0? And I said, I don't even know if there's a way that you can capture this experience on an iPhone app as a game. Maybe it needs to be an experience. And, at that point, I had not really delved into extended reality or virtual reality or augmented reality, but I was just starting to think about that. That was like the summer of Pokemon Go, and I think we all remember how transformative that really was. It's like you're going out into the world, you can discover these things about where you are. You can put the phone away, or you can look at it. It's not, so in your face. It's not like you have the goggles on and to the occlusion of everything else. So it really, I would say that being there, we spoke for about half an hour about the possibilities of what the, if you were going to try to preserve this event in this place and time, all these different fires, all these incredible chants, you have elders, you have children, you have these different things that are being said, these, some are speaking, a language, which, maybe some of the younger ones are beginning to learn. They may not learn it as well as the generation before, and how that happens, and then the language goes away, right? So if you were going to try to capture something like this, how do you actually do it? So that became really our quest, essentially, since then, we've come up with a number of things. I mean, if you are going to preserve the culture, we're very fortunate to be able to have access through Kilma to a lot of tribal leadership, both here in San Diego County and different places around the country as well. So, just to be able to take sort of a state of the nation, like, what do the tribal chiefs think? What is it like to be a modern day tribal chief? What does it mean, the casinos, there's sort of a judgment there, but then, like all of the good that the money does for its people, like the community and the elders and the housing and education and so on. I mean, those are very important things. So within that, and then of course, like narratives from the elders themselves. I mean, there's just so much. I think what's very, very interesting about learning more about Dominique and Falko's work is that you're looking at heritage sites that are, and also anthropological sites and archaeological sites that are thousands of years past. So we have a lot of inference, right, that we need to sort of make in order to understand what had happened. We have a rich, sort of cultural treasure trove here now. Native American culture, especially in San Diego. I don't know if you all know this, but San Diego County is home to 18 tribal, reservations, which is more than any other county in the United States, which is very cool. And arguably, the Kumeyaay and the Luiseño and the Capino, have lived here between 10,000 and 12,000 years. Their ancestors go that far back, and so you could say, within that, aren't they maybe, they're fortunate they've been able to stay sort of close to their ancestral lands, but, have they? Because, when you talk about having your sort of, tribal, or your access to the ocean and your trade routes and all of those things sort of removed from, your access to them is removed because you're now sort of on this reservation or that one, I think your culture changes. So those were some of the things that we're, sort of considering when you think of, like, if you were going to try to create an app that, really comprehensively told the story, what would it need? A lot of the tribal chiefs say the language is important. in 200 years from now, one of the interviews that we had with our tribal chiefs was, in 200 years from now, where do you see your tribe? And many of them said, well, we need to preserve the culture. And someone had asked, I think Nicole's question was, how do you define tribe? And a federally recognized tribe, from what I've learned from Kilma, is really, this is, based on treaties, it's built into the Constitution. Tribal governments themselves are, kind of like a third, another branch of government. They're sovereign nations. I mean, they sort of run their own, sort of governmental, assets. So, essentially what we have is a group of, nations that really are kind of, you want to hang on to the culture. Why should there be a, sort of cultural exception made, a governmental exception made for a group of people if the culture is not intact? And, there is a thriving culture. And, how do you capture that? How do you push it forward? Some of the technology that we've developed essentially, it's a great use case for 360 cameras, great use case for volumetric video, great use case for AI. Some of the things that we've done, include, some of the, 3D modeling as well, objects. So it gets back to this idea of where are you in the land? Where are the stories? What are the stories that were on the land that you're on now? What were they? Who lived here? Why is that important? So these are some of the questions we're trying to answer. Essentially it comes back to the primacy of place. So, one of the things that you see when you first open our app is a map. And that's actually something that, we think is very important. There are stories, we like to say every square mile has a story. We have right now the ability in our app to sort of geographically pinpoint by geo-coordinates specific stories that we've created. Where we're also developing the ability to geofence specific activations, because we are able to say within a certain radius what your access to a particular story might be for its relevance. But then if you think about it, how do you make this application relevant to everybody who uses it? We want to use tribal geofences because these are a way that you can actually connect with the language and you can connect with the culture. It's not specific to a particular location, perhaps, but this is something that you could use to, for example, as you're driving through a land, you could, listen to particular podcasts in a language. You could see words on the horizon, sort of like augmented reality, words and artificially intelligent, object recognition in a language. So these are some of the things that we're building as well. I think it's important to think about how the geofences actually look compared to the tidy borders that are our current geopolitical maps, right? I mean, there's a lot of overlap. And so like, what does that mean for the experiences? In some locations, you might have several words for the same thing. There's a lot of language overlap, and there's some, I think we're all better for the idea of being able to share lands and languages, and like, what does it mean to have that kind of confluence? So this is one of the things that we're working on right now. Essentially, we have a rich treasure trove in a local elder. His name is Stanley Rodriguez. He teaches a Kumeyaay language class at Kumeyaay Community College. We have a lexicon of words from him that we're building. So basically our next iteration of the app is going to be, a set of 50 objects here in Kumeyaay country, in Lusitania country, and in Kapilya country, where we can recognize about 50 to 100 objects. So what you're seeing here, and I'll play it again, is essentially the ability to, so this is on top here, this is the Google AI recognition of objects, and you see it's sort of exhausting itself trying to figure out what it's looking at. Whereas here, what we've done is really kind of taught it to recognize only the things that we have in our lexicon and do it really well. So, may not have all the words for everything, but we have a lot of words for things. And so, this is how basically this could work in our next iteration of the app. We'll use our own model. That's one use case for the map. Another use case for the map too is, the idea of geography. And, I think we share a lot of similarities in a way with, our mission of like how we want to sort of like uncover the information that's in a particular landscape. With Falko and Dominique's team, the work that you guys are doing is absolutely wonderful, and it's next level. We're just getting started. So, essentially, these are some of the things that we can do. We're using Mapbox on our map. Any of you who are developers will know, I mean, this is what powers Uber and, DoorDash, and you can see where your little driver is going. So it's just, a map API that you can program against events and things. And so, essentially what we want to be able to do is, tell the story of, the current day. What does the street look like? If you peel away the streets, what does the landscape look like? If you scrub back in time, what does the landscape look like? So we're building, a database of images that can overlay, and we don't even hope to get the kind of accuracy. I mean, although maybe if we collaborate, we can, with Dominique and Falco's team. So what we're able to say is we know from, our research, what the particular landscape would have been like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. All we really want to be able to do, because we have no certainty of knowing for sure exactly to the last piece of grass what it looked like, is like, where was the water line? How far out did the shoreline, extend? Where was the desert? Where did the chaparral begin? Where did the coastline begin? So those kinds of questions. And, what does this landscape, mean when you have a cultural component? Like, well, you have this trade route where you had people coming from inland during the winter time. When it was spring, the Kumeyaay would come to the coast and they would spend their summers there, and they would harvest salt, and they would, fish, and they would hunt, and they would, gather objects for trade with groups inland. And inland, they had access to the cactus, and they were able to sell them, twine and trade for twine, and, like hooks for fishing. And so this symbiotic relationship and like the cultural, sort of connection between, tribes was very important. And, if the access to any of those areas, which are so sort of fundamental to, what the, culture is, are lost, then things change, right? So this is actually, I don't know if this is actually going to play, although this is very cool. Let me see if I can get this to refresh. It is, no, I don't think it will. Hold on a second, let me just jump back. It is very cool though, this image. Oh, it won't play. But essentially it's a landscape that paints over previous landscapes. I'll try to show that another way in a moment. Let's just jump forward. So essentially, how much time do I have left? A couple minutes.
Just go ahead. It's all
okay. Good. Okay, cool. So, we're working with Stan. If you have met him, you will know that he is incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly generous with his knowledge. And he is building an Iwa village in Cuyamaca State Park. He has a sort of very broad sort of community of supporters and volunteers through his classes and through his outreach. And so, he's taught native and non-native communities alike, the craft of building a Kumeyaay village, the craft of building the tule boats, the hakwayo. And so what we've been doing is working with him and getting the narratives and finding out, the landscapes within which these things happen. And, we want to be able to eventually digitize the objects that they are creating and, really present them in a geographic, in geographically relevant locations. I think one of the questions that I think you had asked, Lisa, was like, why did we choose mobile? I mean, clearly the resolution on your phone is never going to be as sort of incredibly immersive as something like, what the Wave at, CHEI is doing, or, even on an Oculus, right? But, there's kind of like that old saying about a camera. It's like, what's the best camera that you can take this photo with? It's the camera that you have with you, right? So, I think that a lot of the relevance of what, sort of like cultural heritage preservation and, your ability to, really kind of ask questions and get an answer immediately, to really kind of like connect you and to sort of drive inquiry. It's important that it's on mobile. Ultimately, I would say that, we're really trying to create a platform that's sort of agnostic to actually specific devices. And so that's another consideration, is we have these objects, we have these experiences, how do you future-proof them for, like the next platform, for the next generation of devices? So
jump in with a quick question, Catherine.
Yeah.
Okay, first I just want to signal to the audience that the sign language interpreter will be present. And thank you, Brittany, for staying. We're approved for your service and payment. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you, Catherine, there's a question about is this specific to iPhone, and what kinds of devices are you working with?
Sure. Yeah, so right now it is specific to iPhone, but we are actively working on our Android port. And, so within the object itself, I don't know how, like, I'll find out in a moment, how many of you were able to actually download the app and see it. Yeah, I mean, we want to be able to make it so that you have your device, you go out into the world, you just want to find out, well, I am here. Tell me about where I am, give me the history, the indigenous history of this place. And then the phone will be able to do it for you, whether it's a virtual, whether it's an extended reality experience, whether it's an object, whether it's language, or all of the above. Those experiences will be available to you on, by geolocation. For the purposes of the actual demo, I'm sure you noticed, nothing is really locked away. We made everything available no matter what location you're on, because, for testing purposes, it's hard. I mean, we can't really expect people to, drive down to the beach just to look at the boats, at least for now. So, once we sort of, get to a certain scale, certainly those kinds of things will be possible. It is possible now. It's just, we want people to be able to, first and foremost, interact with the objects, and we want to get some feedback on, what would make the experience even better. So I guess with that said, let's see, what else do I have here? So those are the objects. Oh yeah, this is actually kind of interesting. So one of our experiences has been chosen for the South by Southwest Film Festival. This is what a 360 video looks like when you flatten it out for a monoscopic view. It tells the story of Native American, soldiers from the Choctaw Nation who were able to use their native language to convey military code across enemy lines during World War I. And, it's an important story. We're able to show it in immersive reality at South by Southwest, which, we're very excited about. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the workflow, it's from a design point of view, it's very interesting. I mean, certainly this would be very, very different if you had the, even Google Cardboard glasses on and you were looking at them on our app, or even if you didn't have the app and you're looking at it, a flat screen, you could basically just sort of move your phone around and you're sort of in the middle of all these soldiers running around you. That's the sensation. I'll just sort of quickly go through some of my other images. You have the ability to, really kind of use very sort of inexpensively made, assets relative to what, I think is the typical sort of immersive reality experience and production into something that's, we would like to think, really very immersive. So, essentially we have a workflow that we've created. There's a green screen. We take the volumetric video that we, shoot on a green screen and apply shaders to it, that we develop especially for this. From a design consideration, how do you render historical or cultural objects respectfully? Like if there's too great of a resolution, or if you're just sort of like, sort of rendering it like, in, like Valorant or 3D game engine, maybe that's a little bit too sort of detail specific. We wanted to try to get something that had a little bit of the mystery of the past to it, and really kind of suggest that maybe you are invited to rather bring your imagination as to what these soldiers like. And, you know, in this particular story, or, you know, any historical figure that we, you know, choose to tell. So this, you know, group of soldiers that you saw running, it's really just this one soldier. We shot him on a green screen, you know, sort of cloned him a bunch of times in our game engine and applied the shaders and, you know, sort of choreographed what they did. And, you know, so, you know, we have some other workflows which really are going to make it possible to eventually, you know, create some of these things in the app. We want to make authorship as widespread as possible. You know, the same really with the LiDAR scanning and the photogrammetry. We want to take the, you know, sort of, you know, pipeline and, you know, expand it to, you know, people who, you know, would want to participate in these new models of culture sharing and education. We don't want it to be, you know, siloed in academia. We want it to be ubiquitous. And, you know, once you do that, again, you get into the same issue that, you know, I think the CHEI team are talking about as well. It's like, and if you do that, how do you do it critically? You know, if you know, look at the examples of current social media, there are certainly very thoughtfully created pieces out there, but then there are also things that are created that you know, aren't really so great, right? So, you know, at what point is that tipping point? You want to make it as easy as possible, but you do actually want there to be some sort of elevated, you know, sort of sense of, if not curation on our end, you know, you're just sort of building a platform where, you know, maybe the expectation is going to suggest that, you know, you sort of come here and you bring your, you know, wish to carry your culture forward and, you know, just create something that's of lasting value that does contribute to the culture going forward. We have a lot of buy-in from our tribal contributors, and it's wonderful. You know, we have several chairmen from San Diego, medical director of the Indian Health Council. You know, our music in our app was composed by a young man on the Pala tribe, really very, very talented composer. You know, we've had tribal cultural consultants for the Choctaw piece too, from Choctaw Nation. So we feel very, very fortunate. And that's really, you know, all I have. I mean, you know, we've had some nice recognition in the past year. You know, it's a good time, I think, to be able to ask these big questions. It's like, you know, well, how can we, you know, be more inclusive? You know, so yeah, I mean, essentially, you know, we were at Comic-Con, we're going to be at South by Southwest. You know, some of the things that we are, you know, answering, we didn't set out to answer these questions, but once you begin to, you know, ask the questions of like how is your app relevant? You know, this, there are a lot of use cases, you know, I think for you know, why a cultural app like this could be good for education and, you know, sort of good for moving those kinds of conversations forward. So, you know, with that, I'll just sort of stop sharing and, you know, just hand it back over to the group. Thank you very much.